It was a chilly October evening in a small town in upstate New York, the kind of night where the wind seemed to whisper through the skeletal branches of the old oak trees lining Maple Street. The sun had already set, leaving a gray, lingering twilight that made every shadow seem longer and more menacing. I had moved into the town just a few weeks prior, renting a modest house near the edge of a forest. I had grown up in the city, so the silence here was something I wasn't quite used to. Until now. That night, I learned there was a reason small towns kept their doors locked once Halloween night arrived. I was sitting on my living room couch, nursing a beer and scrolling aimlessly through my phone when a sudden knock at the door made me jump. My heart rate spiked instantly. It wasn't unusual for me to hear the occasional rickety branch hit the house, but this knock had a rhythm. Purposeful. I glanced at the clock. 8:13 p.m. That was prime trick-or-treat time. Expecting a kid in a costume, I opened the door. No one was there, only the wind sweeping fallen leaves across the driveway. I stepped outside, looked around, and saw nothing but shadows stretching from the streetlights. Shrugging it off, I closed the door and laughed nervously at myself. By 9 p.m., the neighborhood was alive with the usual Halloween chaos. Children ran from house to house, their laughter piercing the cool night, while parents tried to keep up, carrying bags, flashlights, and cups of coffee. I decided to make myself a small snack and watch a horror movie. I figured if I was going to live in a small town, I might as well lean into the season. I settled on a classic slasher film and let it play, the flickering TV casting uneven shadows across my living room. Around 10:15 p.m., I heard it again, a knock. This time, slower, deliberate, and unmistakably at the front door. I froze, the sound echoing unnervingly through the house. I grabbed a baseball bat from the corner, something I hadn't thought I'd ever use in my life, and approached the door cautiously. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a figure in a costume, or at least I thought it was a costume. A tall man, wearing what looked like a stitched-together mask, standing completely still at the edge of the porch light. There was a pumpkin in his hand. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stared at me. I opened the door a crack, forcing myself to speak. "Trick or treat," I said, my voice shaking more than I expected. No response. I opened the door slightly more, squinting to get a better look. That's when I noticed something odd. The eyes didn't look human. The dark slits behind the mask seemed to glimmer in the faint porch light, almost like they were reflecting something from inside the house. I took a step back, suddenly very aware that I was alone. The figure tilted its head. Then, slowly, it raised the pumpkin above its head like it was about to throw it. My fight-or-flight response finally kicked in, and I slammed the door shut, my back hitting it hard. Heart hammering, I bolted to the window and peered outside. The figure was gone. No footprints, no car, nothing. I tried convincing myself it was just someone messing with me, a prankster who'd run off when I reacted. But the unease lingered. I decided to lock all the doors, turn on every light, and try to shake it off with another movie. About 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. A notification from an unknown number. "I see you." My hands trembled as I dropped the phone onto the couch. There was no way I could have been that paranoid, right? I mean, maybe some teenager was pulling off an elaborate prank. But even as I tried rationalizing it, a chill ran down my spine. I sat frozen for a while, listening. The laughter outside had begun to die down as the last kids headed home. I told myself to calm down and tried to go to bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind felt amplified. Around midnight, I thought I heard whispering coming from outside my bedroom window. I strained to listen, but the sounds were muffled, distant, almost like multiple voices speaking in low tones I couldn't make out. I convinced myself it was just the wind or maybe some animals, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, waiting. By 1 a.m., the whispers had grown louder. I got out of bed, grabbed my bat, and slowly approached the window. Pulling back the curtain just a little, I froze. Across the street, in the faint glow of a street lamp, I saw multiple figures. Not children, not teenagers, but adult-sized silhouettes. They weren't moving naturally, their bodies twisted unnaturally as if they were jerking in rhythm to some unseen music. Their heads turned slowly toward my house, and then I noticed them, the masks. Each one had a different face, grotesque and stitched together like some kind of macabre quilt. One had the pumpkin, now sitting on the hood of a car parked nearby. I stumbled back from the window, heart racing. I called the police, whispering into my phone and giving my address, but there was static on the line, followed by a whisper. "We're closer than you think." The line went dead. I tried again, nothing. Panic surged through me as I realized my front door was slowly creaking open. I hadn't touched it. I grabbed my bat and ran toward the back door, but then I heard it, a soft, deliberate knock at the back window. I turned, and there they were again, the masked figures, now right outside the glass. I backed up, feeling trapped. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a large knife, the sound of my own breathing deafening in my ears. I debated calling 911 one last time when the lights flickered and went out. The house was plunged into darkness, only the streetlights casting long, strange shadows across the walls. Suddenly, I heard a whisper right behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around. Nothing. But the air felt thick, heavy, like someone or something was pressing against me. I ran toward the front door, but it wouldn't budge. My keys weren't in the lock. I ran to the windows, banging on them, screaming, hoping someone would hear. That's when I saw it. A face right at the glass, staring at me. The mask was different this time. It was human, almost familiar. But the eyes were hollow, empty, like dark voids that swallowed all light. I screamed, trying to back away, but the door behind me creaked open slowly. I ran, stumbled, and fell, the knife sliding across the floor. Then I felt it, a cold, clammy hand gripping my ankle. I kicked and tried to pull free, and after a terrifying moment, the grip released. I scrambled to my feet, grabbed the knife, and ran to the nearest window. It was locked, of course, so I tried to break it with the knife handle. The glass cracked, but not enough to escape through. That's when I heard the voice again. Low, guttural, almost a growl. "You can't leave." I bolted to the front window. The figures had multiplied. Now there were more than 10, all standing motionless, just watching. I didn't even try the door this time. I ran to the basement, hoping to hide anything. The basement was dark, damp, and smelled of mildew, but at least it was out of sight. I barricaded myself behind a workbench, listening as they moved above me. Every step on the floorboards, every creak of the house was amplified. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too terrified to move, too terrified to breathe too loudly. Eventually, the sounds stopped. The silence was suffocating. I waited until dawn, holding the knife with trembling hands. When I finally emerged from the basement, the front door was wide open. No footprints, no tire tracks, nothing. The pumpkin was gone, and the street was empty. I called the police again. This time, they actually answered, but when I explained everything, they seemed skeptical. They sent someone over, but no one could find any evidence. They chalked it up to a prank or my imagination. But I knew what I had seen. I moved out of that house the very next day. I left everything behind. When I drove away, I looked back once, and I swear I saw one of those figures standing in the shadows at the edge of the driveway, watching me go. Years later, I still get messages on my phone from unknown numbers around Halloween. They're always short, simple. "We see you." Sometimes I hear whispers outside my window, and sometimes in the dead of night I see shadows in the corner of my vision. I don't answer the calls. I don't look out the window, but I know they're there. The last time it happened, just last Halloween, I was sitting in my apartment in Boston. It was raining heavily outside, the streets empty, the kind of night where everything feels still until it isn't. My phone buzzed, unknown number. The message, "You can't hide." I dropped it on the table, my heart hammering. Then I heard it. Knocks. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the empty hallway outside my door. I didn't open it. I didn't look. I just sat there holding my breath, praying the night would end. And I know, deep down, that next Halloween, when the sun sets and the shadows stretch long, they'll be back. Waiting. Watching. Always watching. Story the end. It started with the kind of October evening that makes the leaves crunch a little louder than usual and the shadows stretch longer than they should. The air in Cedarville, Pennsylvania, had that sharp bite of early fall, and the town's streets were filled with kids darting between houses in costumes that ranged from gory to goofy. Adults lingered on porches with pumpkin-spiced drinks, exchanging greetings, but for some reason, that year felt off. Something in the wind carried a subtle unease. though most dismissed it as Halloween hype. I was 19, home from my first year at college, and I had a job at a local hardware store. It was the sort of place where everyone knew your name, or at least your face, and Halloween was always the busiest time of year. That evening, my manager had me covering the late shift, and as the last rays of sun bled into darkness, the store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting sharp shadows along the aisles stacked with brooms, chains, and shelves of pumpkin carving kits. The first wave of customers had already left, and the store felt too quiet for that time of night. Around 8:15 p.m., the bell above the door jingled. I glanced up, expecting to see some last-minute shoppers or maybe a parent running errands before their kids finished trick-or-treating. Instead, a man entered wearing a full black hoodie zipped up to his chin, like the hood pulled low over his face. He didn't make eye contact. He walked straight to the aisle with Halloween decorations, lingering over the more realistic animatronics. I had a strange feeling as I watched him. Not quite fear, more like an itch at the back of my neck. "Can I help you find anything?" I called, forcing casual politeness. He shook his head, still not looking at me, and muttered something too quiet to hear. I shrugged and went back to restocking shelves, trying not to fixate on him. After about 10 minutes, he disappeared from the aisle, and I assumed he had left. That was when I heard it, a low, rasping laugh coming from the back of the store. My stomach dropped. It was not a laugh you could mistake for someone joking. It was deliberate, almost amused, like he was watching something unfold only he knew about. I walked toward the sound, trying to convince myself it was a recording or an animatronic, but as I reached the Halloween section, the aisle was empty. Just empty shelves and the faint scent of rubber and fake blood. My chest tightened. I returned to the counter, telling myself I was imagining things. About 15 minutes later, the man reappeared. This time he was holding a plastic mask, the kind that looked disturbingly realistic, with dark, hollow eyes and a gaping mouth. He stood just a few feet from the register, staring at me silently. "Are you going to buy that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, he shook the mask from side to side and then turned toward the exit. I exhaled, thinking it was finally over, but then I noticed something chilling. As he reached the door, the motion sensor light above it flickered erratically, and he froze, staring out into the empty parking lot. His posture stiffened, and then he just vanished. I blinked, my brain struggling to process what I had seen. The door hadn't opened. The lot was empty. There was no back door in that section of the store. I didn't sleep well that night. Every creak and groan of the old house sounded like footsteps, and the shadows seemed thicker, more tangible than normal. I chalked it up to being spooked. Halloween has a way of doing that. The next day, word spread around town about a string of disappearances. Nothing major, at least nothing that made national news, but 3 teens had gone missing while trick-or-treating on the outskirts of Cedarville. Their last known locations were eerily close to the hardware store and a nearby wooded area. People whispered about someone dressed in black, someone who had been seen watching kids from the shadows. The description was vague, but it sent a shiver down my spine. A week later, the store received a strange delivery. A plain cardboard box with no return address. Inside were several masks identical to the one the man had carried that night. They were arranged neatly, staring up with hollow, blank eyes. At first, I laughed nervously, thinking it was some kind of twisted marketing stunt, but the masks smelled faintly of something else, metallic, like blood. I couldn't shake the feeling that the man had left them intentionally, and I avoided the back of the store whenever possible. Halloween itself was even worse. I had agreed to help my neighbor's little sister with trick-or-treating, thinking a bit of normalcy would help shake off the anxiety. The streets were alive with kids, but the excitement felt off, tainted. A fog had rolled in, thick and cold, unusual for late October in Pennsylvania. As we walked down Maple Street, I noticed the same black figure from the store. He was standing perfectly still in someone's yard, hoodie pulled low, mask dangling from one hand. My heart stopped. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe someone was just wearing a costume trying to scare people. But then he began to follow us. Not walking, not jogging, but gliding in a way that made no sound. I glanced around, thinking maybe my neighbor was joking, but her face was pale and tense. We ducked into a side street, hoping to lose him, but every turn we took, there he was. Always at the end of the street. Always watching. Never moving his feet in a way that should have allowed him to keep up. Panic set in. I grabbed the little girl's hand and started running, and she screamed, not in fright, but in sheer confusion. The fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the streetlights. Finally, we burst into the driveway of my neighbor's house. I slammed the door behind us and locked it. For a long time, we just stood there, breathing heavily. When I peeked through the curtains, he was gone. The next morning, the news reported another disappearance. A young man had vanished from his home, doors locked, windows intact, no signs of forced entry. The police had no leads. But when I listened closely to the 911 call recording, something made my blood run cold. The dispatcher said the man claimed he saw a shadowy figure with a mask standing silently in his living room. Weeks passed. The town went back to normal routines, but the tension never lifted entirely. I didn't go out much after dark, and my coworkers whispered about the same sightings, about the masks, about a figure that seemed impossible to catch. Some even suggested it wasn't human. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it, but every rational thought was drowned by the lingering sense of being watched. Months later, I returned to college. Cedarville felt like a memory that belonged to someone else. But then, around Halloween, the nightmares began. Every night, I would wake to the sound of quiet footsteps outside my dorm room. My roommate insisted it was the building settling, but I knew better. In my dreams, the figure appeared, standing in the corners, always watching, always silent. Sometimes I would wake and find a single black mask sitting on my desk. Always the same mask from that night at the store. I told myself it was stress, the power of suggestion, Halloween hysteria. But my friends reported similar experiences, masks appearing inexplicably, glimpses of someone moving just outside their rooms, the faint smell of iron in the air. One friend vanished completely for a night, only to return with no memory of where he had been, just wide, terrified eyes and whispers about a man who watches. The true horror came the following year. Cedarville had its annual Halloween festival, and I had reluctantly returned to see my parents. The streets were filled with children and families, laughter bouncing off the buildings. I was distracted, trying to ignore the unease coiling in my stomach. When I saw him, he stood at the edge of the festival, partially hidden behind a row of carnival games. Hoodie up, mask dangling in his hand. The crowd passed between us, oblivious, but I froze, unable to move. His head tilted slowly, deliberately, like he recognized me. And then, just as quickly as he had appeared, he was gone. No one else saw him. I tried to explain, but the words sounded insane, even to me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling, hearing faint whispers in the hall. At some point, I fell into a restless doze and woke to the sound of tapping at my window. Heart hammering, I crept over, and through the thin glass, I saw a single mask, balanced on the sill, eyes staring directly at me. I grabbed it, intending to destroy it, but it was heavier than it looked. And then I noticed the faint, sticky residue on the inside, the unmistakable scent of blood. The memory of that night at the hardware store hit me like a punch. This wasn't a game. This wasn't Halloween hype. This was real. And he had been waiting all along, silent, patient, watching. I left Cedarville shortly after, moving to a small town several states away. But even here, years later, the unease hasn't faded. Every Halloween, I double-check my locks, sweep my property, and avoid mirrors. Sometimes, when I walk outside after dark, I think I catch a glimpse of a black hoodie in the corner of my vision, a mask glinting in the faint light, always just far enough away to vanish when I look directly. Some nights, I hear the faint scraping of footsteps on my porch. A shadow lingers where there should be none. I've stopped asking why or how. I only know he's out there, somewhere, patient and silent, waiting for the next Halloween. And every year, when the air turns crisp and the leaves begin to fall, I feel the weight of those hollow eyes, and I know that he has not forgotten me. Story the end. It was the week leading up to Halloween in a small town in Pennsylvania. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, where kids still went door-to-door trick-or-treating, and where the streets seemed emptier than they should have been once night fell. My friends and I were all seniors in high school, And like most of us, we had grown up in this town, taking its quiet streets, old houses, and occasional abandoned buildings for granted. That Halloween, though, something shifted. There was a chill in the air, not the typical autumn crisp, but something heavier, almost deliberate, that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. We had a tradition in our group. Every year, we'd pick one particularly creepy old house and explore it on Halloween night, daring each other to see who would last the longest. This year, someone brought up the old Henderson house. Nobody had lived there for decades. The windows were boarded up, the paint peeled in long strips, and the yard was overgrown with weeds and thorns. Rumors swirled about the place. Some said it was cursed. Others whispered about strange noises at night. But mostly it had just become the town's Halloween dare. No one went inside for years, not because it was illegal or because the police patrolled it, but because there was this undeniable sense that the house didn't want to be touched. It started around 6 p.m. when the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets. We parked a block away, just past the last streetlight that worked, and walked the rest of the way, carrying flashlights and our usual bravado. I remember the first thing I noticed was how silent the neighborhood had become. Even the wind seemed muffled, like the world itself was holding its breath. We approached the house, and the closer we got, the more I felt something pressing at my chest, a kind of heavy awareness, like the air itself was charged. When we reached the front yard, our flashlights caught the remnants of what had once been a white picket fence, now warped and splintered, leaning in every direction. The door was cracked at the bottom, as if someone or something had shoved it from the inside at some point. Nobody spoke, though we all knew we were thinking the same thing. This place felt alive. Not alive in a warm, comforting way, but alive like a predator waiting for the right moment. We debated whether to go around back or try the front entrance. The front steps were shaky, some of the wood rotting beneath the paint, but we chose that path because it seemed less like we were sneaking in. As we got closer, I swear I felt the temperature drop. My breath came out in small, visible puffs, even though the forecast had said it would still be mild. I joked about it, trying to hide my unease, but even my own voice sounded hollow, echoing against the walls of the house like it wasn't meant to be heard. We found the door handle, grimy with rust, and pushed. The door groaned in protest, and then swung open enough for us to squeeze through. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood, mold, and something else, something coppery, metallic. My friend Jake, who always tried to act the bravest, flicked his flashlight around, revealing peeling wallpaper, broken furniture, and a staircase that disappeared into darkness. The beam caught something in the corner, a rocking chair, swaying slightly as if someone had just left it. But no one had. "Okay, this is our stop," I said, more to myself than anyone else. "We get in, see a few rooms, and leave. Easy." But no one moved. Not really. We were all hypnotized by the space, the way the shadows seemed to crawl along the walls, moving when we weren't looking directly at them. We started with the first floor, poking around what had once been a living room and dining area. Everything was coated in a thick layer of dust, and our footsteps stirred it into clouds that danced in our flashlight beams. On a table, we found a cracked porcelain doll. Its eyes were chipped but seemed to glint in the light. Someone joked that it was a haunted doll, and we laughed. But it was that nervous, hollow kind of laughter you make when your body knows something is wrong, but your brain refuses to admit it. The further we went, the more I noticed the sounds. Not creaks of the house or the wind outside. Real sounds. Whispered words, faint and deliberate, but always just out of reach. I thought maybe one of my friends was whispering behind me, playing a trick, but everyone was right beside me, frozen in the same way, staring at the walls. "Do you guys hear that?" I finally asked, my voice cracking. Jake laughed. "It's probably just the wind." But it wasn't. Not the wind. We all heard it. The whispering seemed to move with us, following, circling, a string of voices so faint we could barely understand the words. Occasionally it sounded like a name. Mine. I swear, I heard my name being called. We made our way to the staircase, and that's when things got worse. The whispering grew louder, more insistent. My flashlight flickered, then died. A cold hand, so cold it burned, brushed past my arm. I screamed and swung my flashlight, hitting nothing but the empty stairwell. Okay, seriously, we're leaving, I said, my voice shaking. But as we turned to go, the front door slammed shut on its own. The sound was deafening in the quiet house, like a gunshot, and when we all turned back, the rocking chair in the corner had stopped moving. In the silence that followed, a new sound began, a slow, deliberate tapping, like fingernails rapping on wood. It was coming from the walls, from everywhere. Panic set in. We bolted for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Jake tried pushing with all his strength. I joined him. Nothing. It was like the house itself had become concrete, immovable, trapping us inside. The whispering escalated to murmuring voices, overlapping, incoherent, all around us. I could feel them crawling under my skin, burrowing into my mind. I stumbled backward and fell onto the floor. And that's when I saw it, a figure at the top of the staircase. Not fully visible, mostly shrouded in shadow, but the outline of a woman, or something resembling a woman, stood there. She was wearing what looked like a tattered dress, blackened with age, and her head tilted unnaturally to the side. We froze. I couldn't move. She raised one arm slowly, deliberately, pointing at us, and in a voice that was not a whisper, but not fully human either, it said, "You shouldn't be here." The floor beneath me vibrated slightly, like the house was shivering. Then came a low, guttural growl, and the figure moved. No, glided toward us. Every instinct screamed to run, but the front door remained locked as if mocking our fear. Jake screamed and shoved at the door again, harder this time, and miraculously it gave way. We spilled out into the night, gasping for air. The cold hit us immediately, and the whispering stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it hurt our ears. We didn't stop running until we reached the car, parked a good distance away. None of us spoke for several minutes, just stared at each other, trying to process what had happened. The streetlights flickered as if uncertain whether to illuminate us, and the houses around us seemed impossibly normal after the chaos we'd just escaped. On the way back to town, none of us made eye contact. When we arrived at Jake's house, we agreed to split up and pretend none of it had happened, though we all knew we'd never speak of the Henderson house again. I tried to shrug it off, rationalize it. Maybe it was an elaborate prank, maybe it was collective hysteria, maybe my mind was just playing tricks. But the thing I couldn't shake, the thing that still haunts me years later, was the sound. That whispering. Sometimes late at night, I swear I hear it again. A faint voice, calling my name, soft but insistent. And every Halloween, without fail, I feel the same weight on my chest, the same cold air pressing in, and I know that house hasn't forgotten. The following year, a group of teenagers broke in, daring each other to go inside. They never came back. The police found the house empty, the door wide open, but no trace of them. It's said that sometimes if you walk past the Henderson house at night, you can hear whispering from inside, and occasionally the rocking chair moves on its own. I don't go near that street anymore. I don't tell anyone the story in full because people won't believe it, and those who do often laugh it off. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And every Halloween, I remember the shadow at the top of the staircase and the voice that told us we shouldn't be there. Sometimes I wonder if it's still waiting. Not for me, maybe, but for the next group of teenagers foolish enough to think they're brave. And I know, in the deepest part of me, that if they step inside, they might never leave. I never went back, and I never will. The Henderson house stands at the edge of town, silent but not empty, and every Halloween, the air around it gets colder. I can't explain why it chooses some people and not others, but I do know this. Curiosity doesn't just kill the cat in that house. It traps you. It reaches in and touches you, even when you're far away, and it waits. It always waits. Years later, I moved away. I went to college in another state, got a job in a city where no one knew me, where Halloween was just candy and costumes, nothing more. But even there, when October comes around, I feel that weight again. I wake up in the middle of the night gasping, feeling as though someone is in the room with me. I tell myself it's just stress, just dreams. But I know better. The Henderson house never left me. I carry it with me. The whispering, the cold, the sense that it's always watching, always waiting for another chance. And every year when Halloween rolls around, I check the news, see if anyone went missing near my hometown, and pray that no one else will make the mistake we did. Because once that house has noticed you, Once it knows your name, there's no turning back. You might walk away, you might think you're safe, but it remembers, and it waits. Story the end. It started with the leaves. That fall, the town of Miller's Creek seemed quieter than usual, even for October. The streets were lined with piles of orange and red leaves that rustled underfoot, but fewer kids ran from house to house. Fewer porch lights glowed with carved pumpkins. People whispered about the new family that had moved into the old Hawkins place, the one on the far end of Elm Street. Nobody really knew much about them. All anyone had seen were shadows behind drawn curtains, and a moving van that came and went at odd hours. I first noticed something was off when my friends and I, my best friend Mike and his younger sister Jenna, decided to explore the Hawkins place a week before Halloween. It had been empty for years, and we all knew the rumors. Kids had gone missing there decades ago, the stories said, and while nobody had lived there since, the house had a reputation. We weren't supposed to go near it, but curiosity is a hell of a thing for 16-year-olds, and we were reckless. The house was massive, an old Victorian with peeling white paint and sagging shutters. The yard was overgrown, grass tangled and wild, leaves thick on the ground like no one had touched it for years. The front door was slightly ajar, and we pushed it open with more courage than sense. The air inside was cold and smelled like damp wood and something else. Something metallic. "God, it smells like an old hospital," Jenna whispered, clutching Mike's arm. "Just come on," I said. "We're not staying long. We just want to see the place." The main hall was dark, lit only by the fading daylight filtering through grimy windows. Dust motes floated in the air. Our footsteps creaked on the floorboards. I remember thinking that the house was too quiet. There were no groans of settling wood, no rustle of rats, nothing, just silence. We moved from room to room, peering at old furniture draped in sheets, yellowed wallpaper, and cracked mirrors. Then we found the stairs leading to the basement. The door was chained, but the lock had been broken, hanging loose. "I don't like this," Jenna said, tugging at my sleeve. "Don't be a baby," I muttered. I wanted to see what was down there. The basement had always been the scariest part in every horror story. Maybe we were just looking for a thrill. The stairs were steep and narrow, and the air grew colder with each step. When we reached the bottom, the basement was dark, and I could just make out the shape of old furniture and boxes stacked against the walls. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, just behind us. I spun around, but there was no one there. "Did you hear that?" Mike asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's probably just the wind," I said, though my stomach tightened. The house didn't feel right, and my usual bravado was cracking. Then it came again. The whisper closer, clearer. "Leave. Now." We froze. Jenna grabbed my arm. "We shouldn't be here," she said. Suddenly, the air shifted. The temperature dropped, and a metallic smell hit me in waves, making me gag. Shadows flickered across the walls, as if someone or something was moving just out of sight. Then the whisper turned into a low, guttural laugh. "Run!" I shouted, and we scrambled up the stairs. The moment we hit the top, the front door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I tried the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Panic set in. "Mike, help me!" Jenna cried. I could feel something brush past my arm, cold like ice. Then we heard it, footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming down the stairs. They weren't ours. Whoever or whatever was in that basement with us was coming up. We bolted for the windows. One was broken, and we climbed through, cutting our hands on the glass, but we didn't care. We ran all the way to Mike's house, lungs burning, hearts hammering. Behind us, I could have sworn I heard the whisper again, soft and taunting, "See you Halloween." We didn't sleep that night. Jenna was convinced the house had followed us, and honestly, I wasn't sure I could argue with her. The next day, we told our parents, but no one took us seriously. Old house stories, Mike's dad said, imagination running wild. Halloween came, and for the first time in years, Miller's Creek felt different. Shadows seemed longer, and the wind carried strange, almost musical whispers through the streets. The Hawkins house had been renovated, well, painted over and the yard mowed, but it didn't feel like the same place. Not to me. Not after what we had heard. That night, we dressed up and joined the other kids for trick-or-treating. The streets were crowded, laughter ringing out, the smell of candy and smoke in the air. Everything looked normal. Then we passed the Hawkins house. From inside, I could see a light flicker, like someone holding a lantern. The curtains were drawn, but the flicker moved. I stopped, staring. "Come on," Mike said, tugging me forward. I turned back, and in the window, I swear I saw a figure, pale, hunched, watching us. I blinked, and it was gone. Later, we learned that the family that had supposedly moved in didn't exist. No one in town had ever seen them before Halloween, and by morning, the house was empty again. The police came, but they found no signs of forced entry, no footprints in the yard, nothing. It was like the house had never been occupied. Over the next few years, stories of strange occurrences on Halloween in Miller's Creek started to surface. Kids going missing, shadows following people home, whispers at night that seemed to come from nowhere. And every time, the Hawkins house was mentioned. By the time I was in college, the house had been condemned, left to rot again. But even from a distance, walking past it on late October nights, you could feel it. Cold, watching, waiting. And sometimes, if you listened closely, you could hear a whisper carried on the wind just for you. "See you Halloween." I don't go near it anymore. I don't trick or treat. I don't even walk the streets of Miller's Creek after dark in October. But every year when the leaves start to fall and the wind carries the smell of decaying leaves and wood, I remember that night in the basement, the whisper that promised it would find us again, the shadow at the window. And every year, without fail, I see the flicker of light in the Hawkins house, just for a moment. And I hear it, always. "See you Halloween." It's been 10 years since that first night, but it's still fresh in my memory. I've told friends, police, even a local journalist once, but no one believes me. They call it Halloween hysteria, imagination, stories to scare kids. But I know what I saw, and I know what I heard. Last year, I was home for Halloween, avoiding the streets, staying in with the lights on. Around midnight, I heard a soft knocking at the door. My heart stopped. I didn't move for what felt like forever. Then the knocking stopped, replaced by that whisper, soft, almost tender. "See you." I don't answer the door. I never will. This year, I can feel it coming closer. The leaves are piling up, the streets are quiet, the town holding its breath. I see shadows flickering behind curtains that should be empty. I hear the faintest whisper when the wind blows, just enough to make my blood run cold. The Hawkins house is waiting, always, and I know, deep down, it never forgot us. Story the end. It was a crisp October evening in a small suburban town in Ohio. The streets were lined with the familiar sights of Halloween. Carved pumpkins flickering on porch steps, children running in costumes that ranged from cute to terrifying, and the smell of autumn leaves mixed with faint traces of candle smoke drifting through the air. That year, the weather had been unseasonably cold for late October, which gave the night a sharper edge than usual. The kind of edge that made you feel like something unseen was watching, waiting for the wrong move. My friends and I, 5 of us, all college students back for the weekend, had decided to celebrate Halloween the old-fashioned way. Not a big party, not haunted houses with actors jumping out of fake coffins. We wanted the thrill of something genuinely spooky, the kind of scare that made your stomach twist and your skin crawl. That's how we ended up at the old Wexler farmhouse, a place that everyone in town whispered about, but few dared to approach. The Wexler farmhouse had been abandoned for decades. Its windows were boarded up, the paint on the siding peeled like sunburned skin, and the barn leaned precariously to one side, threatening to collapse at any moment. Local legends said that the Wexlers had been a large, wealthy family in the early 1900s, but one night something terrible had happened. Something involving a fire, a disappearance, and possibly murder. No one knew the details, and no one wanted to find out, but the stories alone were enough to give you pause. We parked on the edge of the cracked asphalt road that led to the house and gathered our flashlights. I remember that night vividly. The air had a damp, metallic tang to it, and the wind rustled the dry leaves in a way that sounded almost like whispers. My friend Jake, always the bravest, or perhaps the most foolish, pushed open the rusted gate, which squealed like a dying animal. "This is it," he said, grinning. "Nothing creepy about it at all." I tried to laugh, but my throat was tight and the hairs on the back of my neck were standing on end. Emily, the most cautious of our group, whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't." But I shook my head. Once we were committed, there was no turning back. The front door was partially ajar, as though someone had left it that way long ago. Inside, the smell hit us immediately. Mold, rot, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like blood, lingering in the corners. Dust coated every surface, and the floorboards creaked ominously under our weight. We shone our flashlights around, seeing remnants of the past. A broken rocking chair, tattered curtains swaying as if the house itself were breathing, old photographs yellowed with age. Faces stared out at us, frozen in time, eyes dark and hollow. We explored the main floor first. The kitchen had rusted utensils scattered across the counters, and the stove looked as if it had been used last during the Depression. Upstairs, the bedrooms were filled with broken furniture and the lingering feeling that someone had once been there and never left. In one of the bedrooms, we found a diary, its leather cover cracked and pages yellowed. Emily flipped it open, and her face went pale. It's from the Wexlers, she whispered. Look at the dates, 1922, 1923, and these entries, they're weird, like scared. The diary entries spoke of strange noises at night, shadows moving across walls, and the sense that the house itself was alive, watching, judging. The last entry was scrawled hastily, almost frantically. He's here. He won't let me leave. Don't come here. Stay away. Please. We laughed nervously. Ghost stories, right? That's all it was. But the air felt heavier, and every creak of the floor made my heart jump. We decided to go into the basement. The stairs were narrow and steep, coated in grime and spider webs. The smell got worse as we descended. At the bottom, our flashlights revealed old storage crates, broken furniture, and a thick layer of dust covering the concrete floor. But it wasn't the clutter that caught our attention. It was the writing on the walls. Red, smeared letters spelled out, "You shouldn't be here." Jake laughed again, trying to play it off. Paint, right? Probably just kids messing around decades ago. But then we heard it, a soft, dragging sound, like someone or something moving across the floor above us. And then a whisper, almost too soft to hear. "Leave," Emily gasped. "Did you guys hear that?" We froze. The basement door at the top of the stairs slowly started to close on its own, as though pushed by some invisible hand. I sprinted up and grabbed it before it could slam, my hands trembling. Everyone else followed, pale and silent. We decided then that we'd had enough. But as we headed toward the exit, the front door slammed shut behind us. We didn't touch it, yet the sound was deafening in the quiet of the night. We tried the doorknob. Locked. Panic set in. We ran to the back door, which, unbelievably, opened into a narrow alley behind the house. There, under the dim glow of our flashlights, we saw footprints, not ours, and not recent, but smeared in some dark substance leading toward the tree line behind the house. "What the hell?" Jake whispered. Then the whispering started again, clear this time, coming from all directions. "Leave, leave now." We didn't argue, we ran. Branches whipped against our faces, and the wind screamed through the trees. Every few seconds, one of us would stumble, and I would hear Emily cry out. But we didn't stop. Eventually, we burst out of the woods and onto the quiet suburban street, gasping for breath. We didn't look back. Not that night, and not ever after. Weeks later, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't just stumbled upon an abandoned house. Something had followed us, or maybe it had been there all along, waiting. I began seeing shadows at the edge of my vision, feeling cold drafts in rooms with closed windows, hearing whispers when I was alone. My friends experienced the same. Jake's dog would bark at empty corners. Emily's bedroom door would sometimes creak open in the middle of the night. One night, about a month after our visit, I received a package in the mail. There was no return address. Inside, wrapped in old newspaper, was the diary we had found in the Wexler farmhouse. I had no idea how it had gotten there. And on the inside cover, written in the same frantic, red-smeared handwriting as the basement walls, were the words, "You can't leave." I tried burning the diary, throwing it into the fireplace. The flames consumed it for a moment, but the next morning it was back on my doorstep, dry, intact, and smelling faintly of blood and decay. We all eventually went our separate ways, but the memory of that night stayed with us. Every Halloween, the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before. I started seeing shadows move across my walls, fleeting glimpses that made my heart pound. And sometimes, just before midnight, I would hear that whisper again, soft and chilling, "Don't come back." Years later, I learned that the Wexler family had vanished without a trace, all of them. No records, no graves, nothing. The farmhouse had been abandoned since, slowly decaying into the empty husk we had explored. People still whispered about it in town, calling it cursed, haunted, dangerous. And now, every Halloween, I drive past it on my way home from work. It sits there, silent, dark, waiting. The windows look like black eyes, staring, judging, remembering. And every year, without fail, a chill runs down my spine when I see the faint flicker of light through one of the cracks in the boarded windows. I know the Wexler house is still alive in its own terrible way. I know it watches, waits, and remembers those who dared enter. And I know that if anyone ever goes near it, it will find them. The whispers will start, the doors will slam, the shadows will move, and the footprints will appear. And maybe, just maybe, the diary will find them too, wrapped in newspaper, smeared in red, whispering its warning, "You can't leave." To this day, my friends and I never speak about that night. We tried once, joking around Halloween parties, but every time we started, we would feel the cold air tighten around us, our voices catching, the hairs on our arms standing on end. And that's when we all knew what we had experienced wasn't just fear. It was something far worse, something that wasn't gone, something that remembered. I still have nightmares about it. Nights where I wake to find shadows at the foot of my bed or hear footsteps in the hallway when I live alone. And when I close my eyes, I can still hear the whispers, soft and cruel. Leave. Leave now. Or never leave at all. Some nights, I wonder if any of us will ever truly be free from that night at the Wexler farmhouse. The thought chills me deeper than the coldest Ohio winter. And every Halloween, I know that the house is still there, waiting for someone else foolish enough to enter, to test its patience, to hear its whispers, and to realize too late that some places are alive in ways you cannot imagine. And once you step inside, they never let you go. Story the end. It started the week before Halloween in a small town in Pennsylvania. The kind of town where everyone knew everyone else and the streets were lined with old oak trees whose leaves turned fiery red and gold in the fall. I had recently moved there for work, taking a temporary position as a teaching assistant at the local middle school. I was 24, and moving from a big city to a quiet town like Millbrook was jarring at first. But I liked the charm, the way the air smelled like damp leaves and wood smoke in the evenings, the way porches glowed with soft yellow light, and the kids riding bikes with little ghosts and pumpkin helmets. Halloween was the town's unofficial holiday. The main street was already decorated with fake cobwebs, plastic skeletons, and carved pumpkins with flickering LED candles. The air was crisp, and the sun dipped earlier than I was used to, casting long, jagged shadows through the trees. I had volunteered to help the school with the annual Halloween parade and classroom activities, mostly because I needed to meet people and keep busy. The first odd thing happened during my first evening at the school gym, helping set up decorations. One of the older teachers, Mrs. Cranston, an elderly woman with a sharp voice and piercing eyes, told me a story as we hung fake bats from the ceiling. "You know," she said, lowering her voice like she was afraid the walls might listen, "there's a part of Millbrook that's different around Halloween. People don't talk about it much anymore, but the older kids, my parents' generation, they tell stories about a house on Elm Street." I nodded politely, thinking it was just small-town superstition, but her next words made me pause. "They say every year someone sees him, always at night around the same week of Halloween. No one knows who he is or why he's there. He doesn't talk, just watches. People have disappeared, kids mostly. Not everyone, but sometimes." Her voice dropped further, almost a whisper. "Sometimes he chooses one." I laughed nervously. "Sounds like a Halloween story to scare kids." "Maybe," she said, "but sometimes the stories are true." I didn't think much of it at the time, but later that week I started noticing strange things around the neighborhood where I was staying. My rental house was on the edge of town, near the woods, an old clapboard structure with a creaky front porch and broken shutters. The previous tenant had left in a hurry. The landlord mentioned that the house was haunted, but laughed it off when I asked him about it. The first night, I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps on the porch. Heavy, deliberate, slow steps. I assumed it was some kid messing around, Halloween being so close. I got up, looked through the blinds, but the porch was empty. The shadows of the trees flickered in the moonlight, and I chalked it up to my imagination. The next day, while walking to the grocery store, a group of teenagers on bikes rode past me, screaming and laughing, dressed in elaborate costumes. One of them pointed at my house. "That's the Elm Street house," one said. "Don't go in there. He watches." I frowned, thinking they were joking, but their faces were serious. By the time Halloween arrived, the town was alive with energy. Kids in costumes ran from house to house, their plastic pumpkin buckets clattering with candy. I had agreed to chaperone part of the parade, so I spent the afternoon with a dozen excited kids. But as the sun set and the shadows stretched long across the streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That evening, after the parade, I returned to my house. The air had grown colder, the wind rattling the shutters. I noticed a figure standing at the edge of my yard, motionless. My heart skipped a beat. It was a tall man, dressed in black from head to toe. His face was obscured by a mask, though the eye holes seemed unnaturally large, like they were staring right through me. I froze. I considered calling the police, but when I reached for my phone, he was gone. I told myself it was a trick of the shadows, maybe a prankster in costume. But the unease followed me inside. Later that night, I was woken by scratching sounds at the windows. They were slow, deliberate, not like a branch hitting the glass, but something human. I stayed in my bed, heart pounding, until the noises stopped. When I finally looked, the street outside was empty, save for the fog curling along the sidewalk. The next day, I tried to distract myself with errands, but the feeling of being watched never left. At the grocery store, I caught glimpses of a tall, dark figure in the parking lot, always at the edge of my vision, vanishing whenever I looked directly. By the evening, my nerves were frayed. I called Mrs. Cranston, hoping she could explain what was going on. Her voice was tight over the phone. "You shouldn't be there tonight," she said firmly. "He comes around every Halloween. You have to leave before midnight." I laughed nervously. "Who comes around?" "The man from Elm Street, the one who watches. If you see him, don't look away. Don't run. And whatever you do, don't invite him in." I didn't take her seriously. That night, I stayed home, locked every door and window, and tried to ignore the feeling of eyes pressing against me from the dark. Around 11:30 p.m., I heard it again. The slow, deliberate footsteps on the porch. I peeked through the blinds. He was standing there, taller than the doorframe, still and silent. Something about the way he moved made my stomach twist. He wasn't walking so much as gliding, his presence heavy and suffocating. I remembered Mrs. Cranston's warning. Don't invite him in. My hands shook as I clutched the doorknob, resisting the primal urge to bolt. Suddenly, a knock. One slow, deliberate knock. My breath caught. I whispered, "Go away," though I knew he couldn't hear me. Another knock, then a pause and a scraping sound like nails dragging across the wood. Panic surged. I backed away from the door, accidentally knocking over a chair. The sound seemed to trigger him. He moved closer to the door, and though I couldn't see his face, I felt his gaze pierce through the glass. My phone slipped from my trembling hands. When I reached for it, he was gone. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Every shadow seemed alive, every gust of wind a whisper. By morning, I was exhausted, paranoid, and shaken to my core. I considered leaving the house, but I had nowhere to go. Over the next few days, the feeling didn't leave. I noticed small things. Objects moved slightly when I wasn't looking, doors left unlocked, lights flickering. Neighbors avoided talking to me. Children crossed the street to avoid my house, and even the mail carrier seemed hesitant to approach the porch. The night before Halloween proper, I stayed up, trying to research the house. Online, I found old newspaper clippings, reports of children disappearing, never found in the 1970s and 1980s, always in the first week of October. The locations varied, but almost every report mentioned a tall, dark figure seen nearby. People had written it off as urban legend, folklore, or hysteria, but the patterns were undeniable. By now, I was trembling, but I had no choice. Halloween night would be the climax, the night the man returned. Around 10:30 p.m., I barricaded the doors with furniture, checked the windows, and waited. Around 11:45, I heard the footsteps again, slower than ever, deliberate, echoing across the porch. I looked through the blinds. He was there. Taller than before, his figure more imposing, darker. I felt my chest tighten, panic rising, and I remembered the words from Mrs. Cranston, "Don't invite him in." My fingers itched toward the doorknob, and for a horrifying moment I imagined opening the door, telling him to leave, hoping it would end. Then he knocked. One slow, echoing knock. My knees buckled. And then I saw it. Inside the porch window, a single hand pressed against the glass, impossibly long fingers, clawed tips, and no visible wrist or arm. The hand didn't move, but I felt its weight as if it were pressing through the glass. I fell back, gasping, and the hand vanished. But he was still there, watching, waiting. My phone lay on the floor, but I couldn't reach it without stepping into the open. I crawled backward, away from the door, until I tripped over the furniture. Suddenly the front door creaked, slowly. It wasn't locked. I hadn't touched it. My heart stopped. He was inside. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his presence. A cold, suffocating weight, like the air itself had thickened. I ran out the back door into the woods behind the house. The fog was thick, twisting around the trees, hiding the moon. I could hear him behind me, the same slow, deliberate steps, keeping pace without effort. Panic propelled me forward, branches scratching my face and arms, roots tripping me until I stumbled into an old logging trail I remembered from earlier walks. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of town, where lights from the main street cut through the darkness. I collapsed there, gasping, the sounds from behind gone. I never went back to that house. I left Millbrook the next day, packing my car in silence and driving straight through the night. Years later, I read a brief news article. Another child had gone missing in Millbrook during the first week of October near Elm Street. Witnesses claimed they saw a tall, dark figure, but police dismissed it as pranksters or an urban legend. I know what I saw. I felt it. And I know it waits every year in the shadows, watching, choosing. Even now, I avoid October. I avoid dark streets and quiet houses. I know that no matter how far I go, the memory of that night, that presence, will follow me forever. Story the end. It was a crisp October evening in upstate New York, and the air carried that unmistakable scent of autumn, damp leaves, wood smoke, and the faint tang of decay that had settled over the small town of Millfield. The streets were quiet, save for the occasional distant laughter of children darting between houses in their costumes, bags swinging in their hands as they collected candy. Most of the town's residents had taken the night off from ordinary routine, retreating into their homes, windows lit with the warm glow of jack-o'-lanterns. It was Halloween, and despite Millfield's reputation for being sleepy, there was an undercurrent that year that felt off, like the town itself was holding its breath. Jason Reynolds, a 23-year-old college student home for the break, had grown up in Millfield, but this Halloween felt different. He had just returned from New York City, and the suburban calm that once felt comforting now seemed oppressive. He had his camera in hand, a gift from his grandfather, and a vague plan to wander the older parts of town to capture the fall scenery. Jason had always loved photography, the way light could be bent and frozen, the way shadows told stories that words never could. Tonight, though, there was something in the back of his mind, a nagging unease he couldn't quite shake. He started near the edge of town, where the houses grew sparse and the streets unkempt. The street lamps flickered occasionally, casting more shadows than light, and the wind rustled through the skeletal trees, making them groan like old men shifting in their chairs. Jason's footsteps crunched on the fallen leaves as he adjusted his camera, taking a few test shots of the weathered houses and the orange glow of pumpkins in front of doors. As he wandered deeper into this quieter neighborhood, he noticed one house that seemed out of place. Unlike the other homes decorated with fake cobwebs, inflatable ghosts, and candy bowls on the porch, this house was old, abandoned, and almost completely unkempt. The paint had peeled decades ago, the windows were dark and grimy, and the front yard was overrun with weeds. A single pumpkin sat on the porch steps, its jagged grin worn down by time and weather. Jason felt a tug of curiosity. He had walked past the house hundreds of times as a kid, but he'd never dared go close. Tonight, something compelled him to. He raised his camera and snapped a few shots of the front of the house, feeling the shutters click echo in the silence. As he moved closer to the porch, he thought he saw movement in the corner of the window. His heart jumped, but when he focused, it seemed empty. Probably a trick of the shadows. He stepped onto the porch, the old wood groaning under his weight. The door was closed, but as he raised his hand to knock, it creaked open slightly on its own. A chill ran down his spine, but the curiosity was stronger than fear. "Hello?" he called softly. His voice seemed to vanish into the empty house. He lifted his camera again, switching to video mode, thinking it would be interesting to capture the inside. The hallway was dark and smelled of mildew. Wallpaper hung in tatters, and broken furniture lay scattered. Jason felt a strange pressure in his chest, like the air had thickened. He stepped forward cautiously, scanning the rooms with his camera light. In the living room, he saw a chair tipped over, a dusty doll lying on the floor, and in the corner, a small child's handprint, smudged and gray, on the wall. He froze. That handprint was fresh. Not just dust. It looked like it had been made in the last few hours. Jason swallowed hard, trying to convince himself it was a prank, maybe another teenager hiding out. But then he heard it, a faint whisper. "Leave." He spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one. Only shadows stretched across the room, dancing as the wind rattled the broken windows. He backed toward the hallway, trying to remember the way he came in, but the hallway seemed longer now, darker. And then he saw them, the footprints. Small, bare, smudged in a trail that led deeper into the house, disappearing into the kitchen. Against every instinct screaming at him to leave, Jason followed. He moved silently, camera ready, and the whispers grew, barely audible, like a chorus of children calling his name. "Jason, Jason, come play." The kitchen was a nightmare frozen in time. Old cereal boxes spilled across the floor, a chair lay overturned, and in the sink, water dripped, each drop echoing like a heartbeat. But it wasn't the mess that made Jason's stomach turn. It was the writing on the wall. Scrawled in something dark and sticky were the words, "Stay forever." Jason's hands shook. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead. Then he saw the movement, a small figure, hunched in the corner. He blinked, and the figure darted across the room, faster than humanly possible, slipping into the shadows. Jason turned toward the door, and suddenly, the front door slammed shut with a deafening crash. Panic set in. He tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. The windows were too high, too filthy to climb through safely. The whispers intensified, overlapping, shrieking, and chanting his name. Jason ran to the far side of the kitchen, pressed his back against the wall, and tried to control his breathing. Then the lights flickered, and for a brief second he saw all of them. Children, pale and wet-eyed, standing silently, surrounding him in a circle. Their mouths moved, but no sound came out. Their eyes locked on him with a hunger he could feel in his bones. One of them stepped forward, its small hand reaching toward him, trembling. Jason screamed and stumbled backward, smashing his camera against the floor in the chaos. The children's whispers became a roar, and the temperature plummeted. He could see his own breath in the air now, even though it was October, not December. He forced himself to move, crawling toward the door, pulling with every ounce of strength. The door finally gave way, and he bolted into the night, not stopping until he reached his car parked down the street. Shaking, Jason drove home through the empty streets, hands white-knuckled on the steering wheel. When he reached his parents' house, he was still hyperventilating, but he insisted they come outside to see the abandoned house. They looked at it, puzzled. And then Jason noticed something that froze his blood. There was a line of tiny handprints pressed into the frost on the front porch. Fresh. Jason never went back into that neighborhood again. But in the following weeks, stories began surfacing from other parts of Millfield. Children who had disappeared for hours, only to be found in strange places, pale and silent, refusing to speak. Some had scratches on their arms, small handprints pressed into their skin, as if someone or something had touched them. The police wrote it off as pranks, as local mischief, but Jason knew better. He had seen them. Halloween came and went, but Jason never stopped seeing shadows in the corners of his home, always just out of the corner of his eye. He would hear whispers when he was alone, faint, like 1,000 children murmuring from somewhere he couldn't find. His dreams were haunted by the same house, the same children, their eyes hollow and wet, their hands reaching out. And every October, he felt the pull, the nagging tug of curiosity, as if the house itself was calling him back. Years later, after college, Jason returned to Millfield, curious to see if the house was still there. When he arrived, he found the lot empty. The house had been demolished, replaced by a new development of cookie-cutter homes. Relief washed over him until he saw it. A single pumpkin sat on what would have been the front lawn, carved with the same jagged grin he remembered, and at the base of the pumpkin, a note scratched into the dirt. See you next year. Jason left Millfield that night, never to return, but the whispers followed him, faint at first, growing louder every Halloween, creeping into his apartment, into his dreams, until he could not tell where reality ended and the house began. He tried to tell people, tried to warn them, but no one would believe him. The story of Millfield's haunted house became just a legend, a warning to kids, a ghost story told around campfires. But Jason knew the truth. It wasn't a story. It was a trap. A hunger that waited every year for the curious, the daring, the ones who looked too closely at the shadows. And for Jason, that Halloween had never really ended. Every year, the whispers grew louder until it felt like they were in the room with him, pressing against the walls, reaching for his hands, asking him to come play. He learned to lock doors, to avoid empty streets, to pretend the whispers weren't there. But deep down, he knew better. The children were patient, and so was the house. One day, when the wind shifted and the shadows stretched long, they would find him. And when they did, Jason knew he would be trapped again, in that rotting house with the pale, wet-eyed children, whispers echoing in his mind until he had nowhere to run. Because once the house called, it never let go. Story the end.